All this is Dr. Bobeen Sayed from drbeen.com. Welcome to one more show. So we're going to start with lots of news. I am especially interested in about the UK's opening and reopening. I also want to share with you a news about one of the patients that I have been tracking and discussing with you for about a year. So this is a very, very interesting situation. The situation is this. This family has 5 members in it. Mother, father, mother and father, I believe both are above 50. Father has interstitial lung disease, so issue with the lungs where allergies can cause damage to the lung. His respiratory state is usually lower. He develops infections very commonly. His oxygen saturation is usually 95 and below. Then there are 3 children as well. One of them is a medical student, almost a doctor now, and then other 2 are younger. They are the ones I have been talking about that they had gotten COVID last year. And when I was treating them with hydroxy, some of the children, they developed arrhythmia, so I stopped it. So a couple of updates, which I think are really interesting. Number one, mother and son. Son is, I believe, 13 or 14 years old. They both a month ago developed 103 fever. So bacterial infection, they thought. And because there is almost a doctor at home, final year almost finished, she started treating them with that as well. And they did not suspect that this may be also COVID. Now, remember, they had COVID about a year ago, but they recovered. Within a couple of days, they recovered and they were fine. Then father, so what this girl did, this medical student did, she immediately started her father. She said he had always been on vitamin D and other supplements that I've been talking about. She, in addition to that, thinking that my father already has respiratory illnesses and he will not be able to take COVID, she started him on Ivermectin prophylaxis about a month ago. So she says a week after her mother and father became sick, her father became sick as well. And the sickness was totally this much that he had low-grade fever, 99-ish, plus he had cough and congestion. His oxygen saturation dropped a little bit from 95 to 93. So because she was very concerned about her father, she immediately went out for COVID test. And COVID test came back negative. But by the time the COVID test came back negative, the family had recovered and was okay. And so she sent me this message about her father, that he is 56 years old, hypertensive, interstitial lung disease for last 7 years. His baseline oxygen stays at 95 for last 3 years. And he had COVID antibodies with almost no symptoms. So that is the beauty, which I think is important. This is Pakistan. So if you think about it, folks, in India and Pakistan, new variants are there. They are causing infections. But at the same time, people are able to handle them well as well. I know that there are people who are not able to handle them, and there are so many deaths that are happening. Here is a family where the prophylactic supplements plus ivermectin help them, and help them for those where they thought if COVID occurred, these folks will not be able to handle it. So then she says that after the temperature and everything, she started they were already on supplements. Supplements included vitamin D. So I'm reading it from my phone here. Vitamin D, quercetin, zinc, other multivitamins, and ivermectin prophylactically. And so as soon as this happened, they also nebulized them with Clenil, and then they gave them honey and Nigella sativa as well, the black seeds. So honey and black seed plus these things. And the person recovered without any issues. And when they went for COVID test, he had antibodies as well. So that, and then after that, there are lots of prayers and good wishes for me. But really, at the end of the day, it is, as Dr. Syed Haider said that day, it comes from above. So I'm pretty happy, and this is an important thing that I wanted to discuss with you, that there is a benefit of having these supplements and ivermectins and hydroxy, or if not hydroxy, then quercetin, with zinc, with multivitamins. So I asked them, I said, are you vaccinated? And they said, none of us, the whole family, 5 members, none of them are vaccinated. And I asked them, what is the reason? So we continue. So because I'm in the US, I know more about here that people are hesitant and some are refusing. Even yesterday, when I talked about vaccine related paper, I got so many comments. You can go and read the comments under the video where people are just, some are saying that, hey, this is just propaganda. Some are saying I'm not going to take it anyways. Some are saying messenger RNA is somehow something really bad and it is actually changing the programming. Some are saying that in the last paragraph that you study, that you read, as much as they said it is protective, they also said it could be dangerous too. So I'm not taking. So just like we have these things here in Pakistan, or I believe in India, this hesitancy is there as well. So none of the family members had it. And so she said that what we are torn between is, should we take AstraZeneca or should we take Chinese vaccines? And the rumor, so I'm talking about the rumor, I do not know what is the fact in there for Chinese vaccines. She says that the rumors in the society is that Chinese vaccines are not very effective and AstraZeneca causes blood clotting issues or other side effects. So I was almost due for this discussion. So I hung up and I said, I'll call you afterwards and we'll discuss which vaccine has what. So interesting news I wanted to share with you, to say, please make sure whichever way. Arun, I haven't started sharing anything yet. I was just discussing this. Whichever way you decide, want to take a vaccine, want to wait more, do not want to take a vaccine, but make sure that you continue to protect yourself in whichever way makes sense to you. Protect yourself and protect others. So with this, now let's start our discussion as well. I want to quickly go over some of the news and then we'll have our discussion. Questions as well. Maru already has a question, so why not we start with Maru's question. Hey Maru from UK, how are things in UK? So 2 or 3 days now that UK has at the step 3 of the opening, and I believe June 24th is the step 4 when everything will be fully opened. There is a concern with the 617 or the variant from India, but I think not too big, and we'll look at that. Some of us could have been infected with such a low viral load, which acted as a vaccine. Could that explain some of the asymptomatic? Absolutely. So the main reason for asymptomatic that they observed, at least in the studies, are the following. Number one, it could be viral load too. But the study that I shared a couple of weeks ago, they had said that initial viral load has nothing to do with the symptoms and the disease progression. But once the disease is becoming severe, then a higher load accelerates and causes more widespread damage, which makes sense. So beginning of the disease in that study paper that I shared, viral load was not relevant. Of course, there has to be enough load to start causing infection and then disease, but there any difference was not relevant for disease progression. The second part, that can that be asymptomatic? The other thing, Maru, for the asymptomatic is that we studied that before. Asymptomatic folks are usually those whose immune system handles the virus or the infection primarily with T helper 1 pathway, that is cytotoxic pathway. And we saw that yesterday as well, that the cytotoxic pathway is something that is in the yesterday study is more it's more interesting for the COVID compared to the humoral pathway of the antibody production. It is also interesting that in the UK, the gap between the 2 doses, the window of time between the 2 doses kind of changes the immune system's behavior from one type to the other. If the gap between the 2 doses is less, then antibodies are produced more and cytotoxic T cells are activated less. If the gap between the 2 doses is more, then it seems like cytotoxic pathway or the T helper 1 pathway engages more than the humoral pathway as well. So, but at the end of the day, efficacy is similar, which tells me there's one more thing, Maru, I'm still on your question. The T helper 1 pathway or the cytotoxic pathway is also responsible for lesser symptoms. So those folks who are recovering with less symptoms, they could be, number one, their natural killer cells. We saw that with children. Their natural killer cells are better, are more in number, and are more in function. That would also mean that these folks are less stressed, because if they are adults, their natural killer cells will be more and active if the adult is less stressed. Children, probably because they're just less stressed, they're playing and they're happy, their natural killer cells are more. Plus, children's bodies are brand new, their whole system, all tissues are brand new, so they are working and functioning better. So natural killer cells, T helper 1 pathway, and then the cross or trained immunity. And it is so funny that I talked about the trained immunity yesterday in the paper, and I explained that this actually shows that there is no issue with this reprogramming. That is a function of any of the infection of the vaccine. Any foreign antigen that would come in will help reprogram the innate arm. That is how our innate arm learns. Innate arm does not make memory cells. So the only way for the innate arm to learn is to reprogram its genes to make sure that it responds to that. This is like this, a weird example, but I think you would like it. If in a house you have 2 doors and you close them at night, outside doors, and then you add a 3rd door, you'll have to go close that at night as well. So the immune system, innate arm, when it encounters a new infection, it changes its genetic expressions to be able to manage that infection as well. That is called not genetic reprogramming, but the reprogramming of the innate arm. So reprogramming of the innate arm in children is more, because they continue to become infected with respiratory infections more often than adults. So Maru, these are the basic concepts due to which people are asymptomatically healing. And I love that, because in the herd immunity, scientists continue to forget a couple of things. One is, so I'm going to use this. So one is that, of course, those who are infected and recovered, they are part of the herd immunity. And we have done this discussion that if they have recovered and then their immune system went down, then they're not. Or if the variant is too different, then they are not. But let's just say things are consistent and pathologies are the same and the body is the same. So one is those who got infected and recovered. Second are those who are vaccinated and they have the immunity. Third are those that have actually been asymptomatically infected and recovered and usually are not counted. And this group, this blue one, is more prominent in children. So if you see here in children, of course, there is almost no vaccination. Asymptomatic is more, and then fewer children have. So I would actually make this a smaller one. And then children have actually more asymptomatic and recovery. So this is how the herd immunity actually comes together. This part, asymptomatic part, is something that is missing. And we should do T cell tests to figure out who are the ones, not just the antibody test. So for example, people get up and they start, the research workers, they start testing antibodies to see what is the prevalence of the protection within the society. For example, in UK, they say that we've reached about 70% antibody prevalence in people. Good, that's a great number. But at the same time, you're still missing the T cell protection, because people who have predominantly acted against the infection through the T cells, cytotoxic T cells, they would not show up much on the antibody side, or their antibody titers may show up to be lesser. One has to do T cell test as well to include that group as well. That would tell the correct number. So for example, if I take UK as an example, because we're talking about Europe and Middle East and Asia, that's why Africa. If I take UK as an example, if they're saying that 69.5% is the antibody prevalence in UK, then I'm sure that actual herd immunity is more than that. There is going to be 4, 5, 10% T cell presence as well. So it is going to be 75% to 80% actual herd immunity. Okay, so that was a good question and that got us started. I wanted to quickly show some of the news. Christine says, who in their right mind would choose a Chinese vaccine? So, Christine, Chinese vaccines are actually quite prevalent in the world. There, many Middle Eastern countries, Asian countries, many countries are using Chinese vaccines. And what I did a few talks about them, although not a lot, because I just don't have enough data. I am spoiled by the data with, let's say, AstraZeneca or Pfizer or Moderna, and the detail in the data. And I feel even then that we have less data. And here, some Chinese vaccines just don't have data, and they say we think it is efficacious, we've seen it is efficacious, and go use it. But it is prevalent. So let's do this. I'm gonna quickly look at. So this is drbeen.com. Let's start from Pakistan for a change today. So here, if you see, the number of cases are going down as well. So this is the third wave. How did they manage this time? Number one, the vaccination is becoming more and more popular, but it still is not as big as it could be. Second is they went into a lockdown, more stricter lockdown once again. Although when I'm talking with people there, it seems like lockdown is more of a, so not everybody is going through the lockdown as strictly as government wants. So people are not very compliant there at this time. And I can understand that they have been quite bored throughout the year. So this is India. So once again, check this out. India's, as much as there is a disaster, but look, India's case is 267. So this is May 18, and here is May 6. Within about 2 weeks or lesser, about 10-12 days, the cases have almost fallen to half, and they would continue to fall more. Please realize this. There is a human behavior factor. Why do I keep repeating it? I repeat it thrice a day. The reason is to encourage this, that it's not just the vaccine. You're not helpless to say that now only if I have a vaccine or if I have a drug or there has to be something to protect me. One way to protect yourself is the hygiene, hand washing, mouth covering, social distancing, masking, and so on. And that would create a difference. And I think that is a difference that we are seeing here. Vaccines have not changed. It's still, if I go to Bloomberg for the vaccine levels in India, so if you see here, India 10.5% and 3.1% still there. Is it, to me, it seems like UK, Bloomberg is now falling behind. For example, UK's vaccine levels are actually now about 65 or more. And now they are starting the second vaccine for majority of the population. So it looks like Bloomberg is just behind. Anyways, for India, even if it is not 10%, it may be 12, 13% for the first one, and it may be 5% for the second one. That still is not sufficient to reduce the cases here. So number of cases have gone down. The active cases have gone down, 3.2 million, still a lot, but gone down, which is good news. Deaths are still not gone down. Why? Because the effect of this latest reduction will be realized in about couple of weeks. So the deaths come about 2 weeks after the disease infection that occurs. So deaths are still not there. In addition to that, it's not just the 2 weeks or 3 weeks window. On average, people can stay in a hospital for 4 weeks before they die or they are discharged. The other thing is the medical facilities and the overwhelming of the medical system itself. That can actually add to deaths, because if there are less oxygen, for example, or if there is less medicine available, or if there is less healthcare professionals available, then that contributes to deaths unnecessarily, and that would be separate from COVID's own deaths. I wanted to, while on the topic of India, let me also show the map for India's states. Somebody had commented yesterday. So thank you very much for the cool beans who comment and add value. Somebody had commented that Maharashtra is now using Ivermectin as well. So here is Maharashtra. And if I go to Maharashtra's situation, They are now, so look at this, 419,000. So about half a million, lesser than half a million, 419,000 are the cases on 18th May, active cases. And then on 24th April, 673,000. So quite a reduction. And that may be ivermectin, that may be human behavior in addition to that. Then if I go to Goa, Goa is something that we're keeping an eye on because they have generally started using ivermectin for 18 years and above, and they irritated to my pleasure WHO. So if you see here, this is 13th May, 32,953 or 33,000 cases. And then here on 18 May, 23,000 cases. So definitely going down and going down rapidly in Goa. So that is a good news as well. So folks from India, can you tell me in your area, what is the infection state? How are you using ivermectin or not? Are you using something else? What is the vaccine state and so on? So please tell me, it will be good to know. So going back here, this is another issue that is happening. So in India, number one, cremations, that was an issue. So makeshift cremations were, or crematoriums were being made as well. Then the river, Ganges, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, that has, people are just leaving bodies in the river, and then these bodies would float, and so the rivers are kind of overwhelmed as well. So that is just a sad thing. I hope that humanity, all humanity, comes out of this evil situation soon. So going to continue to review Israel. And here we are, Israel, no new cases. So either they have total current infections 631. When did they have 631 before? They had 631 or 600 on March 19 of 2020. So they have gone down to about a year below ago's cases when they were starting. And so here there are some deaths that are reported, 3 deaths here, but generally they are doing very well. So that is Israel. UK, we talked about it. So this Monday, this week's Monday, is when they started this step 3 of the opening up of the society. And I was seeing that some of the news were saying they are actually sitting inside in the bars and pubs, and they are talking in there. And then I think on 24th June, the whole society would open up again. For me, what I was keeping an eye on is the variant 617, 618, the variant that originated in India, is that causing a spike again? And so if you see here, we are not seeing a spike. And the consistency of the infectivity that is continuing, the data that they have published shows that the folks who are not yet vaccinated, they are the ones who are actually a primarily larger contributors to the number of new cases. So unfortunately, they are getting sick. So this is still a lower trail of the infectivity. The number 40,000 currently infected, they had 40,000 last time on August 26th. So a few days ago, remember, they had reached back to September level. Now they have slid back further, and now they are at the August level. So that is really good that they are, with India variants, with society opening, they are still doing better. So that is an example right now in front of us that this is how a society can manage and stay open as well. And they are opening further as well. So more power to them. I think it is a great display of how to control it. One brave thing that they did, 2 brave things that UK has done, which I really appreciate. One was the gap between the 2 doses. And second one was mixing and matching of the vaccines. This is a great thing to say, you know what? We realize that AstraZeneca or Pfizer or AstraZeneca or Johnson & Johnson, so I think they have AstraZeneca. We realize that there may be an issue with thrombosis, so why not we allow people to take something else? instead of forcing them to take the second dose with the same vaccine. So that is a good thing that they've done. That is thinking. The area where I still feel critical of British health agencies is resistance to ivermectin and just not promoting vitamin D correctly. I remember about a year ago, they did say that, hey, one should use vitamin D. That is still better than what US authorities did, but the quantities or the amounts they said was tiny. But still, at least people would have gotten this impression that, hey, this is important. In the US, we didn't even do that. So some very interesting decisions on the UK's part. US, although we're talking about Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Asia, but I wanted to show as a comparison, here is US. So US is going down as well, 27,000 new cases. Compare that to at one time at the peak, we had 300,000 new cases. So more than 10 folds reduction in the cases. That is excellent. Active cases are still high, and the number of deaths have gone down as well. Still a lot, but compared to, for example, here, 4,383 deaths versus 733. So much better, 75% improvement here as well. So that is US. Nepal. So Nepal with India also had a crisis that started, and similar issues, crematoriums, medication, and so on. So you see that here is a second wave for them as well. I have a few friends from Nepal who are medical students now. They're medical doctors. They used to be my students, now doing great work over there. So more power to them. Active cases in Nepal are at the highest possible at this time for them. And if you see, total deaths are increasing as well. So this again is actually lack of resources, plus the vaccination is really not there yet. So if I look at Nepal's vaccination, I think it's not even going to be on the map. Look at Pakistan's vaccination, 1% and 0.5%. So nothing. And Pakistan is battling with it. Somehow they're fortunate that they are not beaten that badly. So where is Nepal? Do you see Nepal here? So somewhere here is Nepal as well. Nepal has a lower vaccination as well. So this is Nepal's situation. Brazil. So once again, if you look at the Brazil's cases, they are still, this whole thing is still a broad, big brush that is going on. They reduced, for example, 63,000 new cases versus at the peak 77,000. So that's not a huge drop. And so it's still a concern that Brazil is continuing to be in this situation. So somebody from Brazil, can you tell me, how about ivermectin? Is that being used? How about supplements? Are they being used? There was a time that these were being used. What is the situation now? And the 1 million active cases. So at this time, as the countries stand, US has the most cases, then India has become the most cases. It was actually behind Brazil, but then India has now become the second most cases country, and then Brazil. And if you see here, this is the deaths, and they are also at the peak, 3,000 deaths per day, and at this time, 2,000 deaths per day. So about 30% improvement, but still this is bad. Bad in terms of all those countries that are stuck and that have a lot of deaths going on at this time. They should at least allow ivermectin more openly, just like India is doing. What UK did, so you have three models in front of you. Models like Taiwan, South Korea, that got ahead of it without vaccines or without ivermectin-like things, but by general stricter lockdowns or more contact tracing, more people behavior is what got ahead of them. And they have been that way for a long time now. The second group is countries that quickly vaccinated themselves. I would think Israel, UK are primary examples, US to some extent. And then the third group is the countries that could not ramp up on the vaccines fast enough, but they are working with supplements, for example, India. And then there is a fourth group that is not working with any of them and they are stuck. So I think we need to figure out how to. This was a WHO, FDA type responsibility, which they have dropped the ball. And it has caused, what other damage should we say be okay? There are people who are dying. I don't think there is more damage than that can occur to a family. So daily new cases in Brazil. So we just talked about it. Taiwan. So Taiwan has been actually pretty good in the control. So if you see here, the 18 cases, 19 cases, and now in recent time, they had some more cases as well. So here is Taiwan. I think that this may be some close quarters areas where the infection is. Just like Seychelles started having the infections because they opened up their society and people started coming in. Taiwan, I believe, has within their own communities, closed areas, there is spread there. Hong Kong. So somebody was asking me yesterday that, hey, how about Hong Kong? So Hong Kong seems very interesting. So they've been going up and down. At this time, they are in much better control. So if you see here, their active cases are 82. And this was 82, June 22 of the last year. In my opinion, cool beans, I think our society's world is coming out of this pandemic. We just have to spend a few more months with more care. For some countries where vaccination is less, the ivermectin type usage is less, they may be struggling with it for some more time. But I believe that majority of the countries would come out. Even those that are struggling, for example, India was struggling, and now they're improving because human behavior is such that if we see that something is harmful, we would eventually take care of ourselves. Singapore. So Singapore, way down, 31, 38 new cases. And then their total active cases, 486. This is the tiny, small wave, if you want to call it. It's not even a wave. So they are at the level of September 17 of last year. And number of deaths are one death on March 13, one death on May 1. So they are doing good as well. So with this, let's open up for some questions as well. So let's see, how is everybody doing here? So Faizan Ahmed says, do messenger RNA, mRNA of vaccine travel around cell to cell? What? Can it travel to other organs, or is it localized to one cell or one area where jab is given? Any representation on MSC? So good question. And these are the questions that have been asked here as well. So let me quickly draw this and discuss it. So the question here from Faizan is, will the mRNA of the vaccine, for example, Moderna or Pfizer, will that go from one cell to the next cell, just like the virus itself does? Virus enters a cell, infects it, replicates there, then goes to the next cell and then continues. Then the second part of the question is, can it travel to other organs? So can it go into blood or lymphatics or some other ways and then go to other places in the body? Or is it localized to the area where it is injected? And is it represented on MSC? So many questions. Faizan thought he should ask them all in one go. So let's see if we can answer them. This actually plays into the common myths nowadays that number one, vaccine would produce spike proteins that would just travel around. One of the Cahill's concept was that the vaccine would produce, what are these? Spike proteins that would get attached on the surface of our cells. So that's as incorrect as that could be. So this is one concept that was moving about in the society. And we know the source of this one. The second incorrect concept is that a cell would continue to make spike proteins and it would shed the spike proteins like it has become a factory for spike proteins. And these spike proteins would then go and circulate in the blood, and from the blood they would go to the other tissues as well. So let's say you gave it in the deltoid and now it is in the liver or lungs or brain or wherever. And then there is another related concept which somebody was yesterday. I don't get enough time to be able to answer comments, and some comments are just arguments. So even if I respond to that, then the person would say, how do you know this? And then I would respond to it. Becomes totally unnecessary. So one person was commenting that what you do not know is that the spike proteins would open up the blood-brain barrier. So that's a new concept now, that the spike proteins would somehow open up the blood-brain barrier as if they are the keys to the blood-brain barrier, and they would go and unlock the blood-brain barrier, and then the damage would start occurring. Such weird rumors. I get annoyed sometimes with these. So this is another, that spike proteins would cross the blood-brain barrier. But for these rumors and myths, for the other tissues, as Faizan is asking, for them this is important for us to understand or agree that somehow these spike proteins can get out in the blood and travel around. Then there is another concept, and that is that one cell will make spike protein, and then the spike protein would bind to the ACE receptors of the other cell, and then it would go into the other cell, and then it would cause damage and so on. So Faizan has asked all these questions in one go. So let's look at those questions one by one. Number one, spike protein would primarily stay within the area of where they are injected, and they will be picked up by the cells there. What are the kind of cells in the deltoid muscle? There are the muscle cells themselves, and there are macrophages there are fibroblasts there are neutrophils there are dendritic cells there, and so on. There are multiple cells there. These cells are going to pick up the spike proteins, not the spike protein, messenger RNA. So messenger RNA is wrapped in these lipid nanoparticles. Those nanoparticles are made so that they can easily fuse with the cell membrane, and they can enter there inside a cell, and inside the cell the messenger RNA is released. That messenger RNA goes to the ribosomes of the cell. We have done this discussion, and then they would produce the spikes. Those spikes will be then shredded by the endosome, and once those shredded pieces are done, they will be loaded on MHC1 or MHC2, and those pieces would be shown out on the spikes. Not on the spike, but on the MSC complexes. And these are not even complete spikes. These are pieces of spikes. How small pieces? So spike can have 6,000 or 7,000 amino acids in it. And the pieces may have 10, 12, 20. This is how small those pieces are. And anybody who feels that this is somehow BS and Mubin is just making up their own science, and they want to go and believe sciences from those strange doctors nowadays, just do this. Say loading of MHC1, and for one I wrote I, on, just say this, loading of MHC1, and you would come across many mechanisms. If you don't trust Wikipedia, just go read it in an immunology books. I have some books here. You can buy an immunology book, and in there you can read it. You can look at the studies. You can look at the papers. Don't look at, let's say the whole thing is a conspiracy starting from 2020 to now. Then just look at the literature before that, and you would see that MIC1 loading is there. I'm going to take images there. There must be copyrighted images. But if you see here, for example, this image is showing how the loading is done. This image is showing how the loading is done. Similarly, if you said loading of MHC2, that would also be present here, and there are mechanisms for that too. So first, it is the pieces of the spike protein are loaded. And I have mentioned it many times. It is possible for the spike proteins to spill out of this cell. When is that possible? That is possible when this cell itself would die. How would this cell die that is making spike proteins? Well, a natural killer cell can come and engage here and say, hey, what are you doing? You are presenting some weird things, and I'm going to kill you. Or a neutrophil can do that, or more than the neutrophil, macrophages can do that, or dendritic cells can do that. So there are local cells that can identify sick cells And if these cells are sick, so many spike producing cells will not get sick like they become sick with the virus, because the spike protein is not hijacking their machinery to work. Spike protein is only using, or the messenger RNA is only using a ribosome. So most of these would survive, but some of these can be killed as well. So if they are killed, then imagine this is the cell that got destroyed, and then from there the spike proteins came out. And I have mentioned it many times that these spike proteins, there may be some that would enter the blood because they're just out here in lymph, and most of them would be picked up by macrophages, and then macrophages would digest them as well and present them on on their own surfaces with MSC2, and then the immune system would just continue to getting trained. So somebody said to me yesterday after my talk that, hey, the messenger RNA, I don't want any messenger RNA to tell my cells what to do. Actually, so they said, I would prefer traditional vaccines. Actually, an adenovirus-based vaccine actually tells our DNA what to do. An inactivated virus would also cause a cell to respond through the DNA to understand what to do. Messenger RNA-based vaccines do not tell our cells anything what to do because they do not interact with the nucleus. Messenger RNA directly goes to the ribosome and produces the spike proteins directly. So it is actually the messenger RNA which doesn't do anything, but because the name is messenger RNA, so some people are taking that as, hey, this is a message. So just strange rumors. And I do not fault the folks who have those, who are carrying those rumors. The reason for this is we don't expect everyone who is non-medical to be up with these medical concepts. It was the duty of the doctors and researchers to behave during this time and make sure that they do not unknowingly or knowingly derail people. We are now expecting everyone to become a medical doctor to understand for themselves what is right or wrong. And if that is not possible, then they are working with rumors. This is just a tragedy of this time. So anyways, Fizan, to your first question, will they travel from cell to cell? They cannot. The reason for the spike protein to go from one cell to the other cell will be if there is some active method for the spike protein to come out of the cell and then enter the second cell. Here is why it cannot be possible. Let's say this is a cell that made the spike protein and broke it and presented it on MSC. How can this spike protein come out and go to another cell? But let's say this spike protein can come out because the cell got damaged. Fine, the spike protein is out. Now, how can it enter the second cell? Just binding with ACE2 is not a guarantee for entry. You know that even SARS-CoV-2, just by binding to ACE2, cannot enter. It has to have TMPRSS2. It has to be primed. That priming causes the fusion. That fusion would then, the whole thing is then cause the internalization. But with spike, we do not have those whole mechanisms attached. So can it enter another cell? Let's say even if it does, the cell is just going to pick it up and destroy it once again and present it. So that's the second part of your question. Then can it go to other organs? So that is a question that, will it enter bloodstream? Maybe there would be some spike proteins that would enter bloodstreams, which have spilled out here. So what are the chances for it to enter a bloodstream? First, spike has to be made in a cell. Then the cell has to be broken. Then the broken cells spike have to be spilled out. Those spikes may have to be left alone by the local immune system. And these spikes should go to lymphatic. From lymphatic, they would enter the lymph node. And lymph node is also not clearing them. They escape from there too. And then they enter the bloodstream. That is one way. Or second way is that they cause local blood vessel, and they just cause it to be dilated somehow, and then they enter there. And from there, then in the other tissue, once they're circulating in the blood, they reach the other tissue. And as somebody said, it opens up the blood-brain barrier. Somehow they become lock and key and open up the barriers, and then they go to the other one. So is it possible? No. Can it happen in small quantities? Maybe. Would it matter? Not at all. Wherever they would go, the cells would pick it up and digest them and present them and develop immunity. and the immune system would actually become trained. So I hope that this responds to your, this is a good answer. I hope you like the answer. Now let's see. Colin Hamill says your own mRNA has to be translated so that the vax won't be able to do that. Yeah. So for our own function, Colin, to your point, just to compare, even for our own cells function, what happens is a messenger comes in either inside the cytoplasm or out, for example, to some receptor. Messenger could be growth hormone, norepinephrine, epinephrine, steroids, thyroid. There are so many messenger systems in our body. So either they come and attach to the receptors outside, insulin is a big example, or they enter the cell cytoplasm, steroids are a big example, and then their message, every message to a cell means for cell to do something or to reduce doing something. And the cell would respond by making some proteins that would do something or reducing to make some proteins that would do something. So if, let's say, there is a message here from insulin, and that message says, you know what, please bring in more glucose transporters. The transporters are present in the small vesicles inside the cytoplasm. With this response to insulin, these transporters would go and attach on the surface. Now, if the nucleus wants to say, hey, I want to make more transporters now, there will be some gene expression, that reprogramming of the DNA. So gene expression of the DNA. So some genes will open up, the recipe book will open up at some page, which is for making glucose transporters. And then a messenger RNA is formed inside the DNA. Then that is sent out in the cytoplasm. Over there, it would connect with the ribosome. Ribosome would use that messenger RNA to make that protein, and then that protein will be stored or attached or will do whatever function. Then that messenger RNA will be destroyed. This is a normal function that is happening right now in all of us. And that is what these things do too. So I wanted to do one more thing. This is a question that I almost get every day. And I have a lack of memory for which type of vaccine in Asian region is what kind, which vaccine is what kind. So I just want to read out that list quickly. Covishield is AstraZeneca. So that means it is adenovirus-based vaccine, Covishield. Covaxin is India's own vaccine, which is inactivated whole virus, the SARS-CoV-2. Sinopharm is China's vaccine, which is inactivated virus. Sinovac is also China's vaccine, which is also inactivated virus. CanSino is Canada and China's vaccine, which is adenovirus-based as well. So that means Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, or Covishield, and Sputnik, and CanSino are adenovirus, and there will be more. Based, all of them could be related to the thrombosis in younger women. The inactivated viruses, Covaxin from India, Sinopharm from China, Sinovac from China. And then messenger RNA-based vaccine, frontrunners, Pfizer's, and Moderna. So this is something that I daily forget, that which vaccine is which. So I made a list for myself, so I thought it would be useful to share it with you too. Okay, so what else? So Jonathan Fassett says some popular level diagrams, such as those from New York Times, show spike proteins leaving cells and also being presented as fragments. Are you able to explain why they show it? So of course I can't say why they show it. I can just say this much, that inside a cell, any fragment, any protein that is made, until the cell is made, the cell's function is to release that substance. For example, hormones, thyroid hormones function is to release it, or suprarenal glands function is, the cell's function is to release the substances that they make. Still, they cannot make everything and release it. Imagine if cell makes anything and just release it outside, the cell and the environment would die. uh, Sweat glands release sweat, mucus glands release mucus. These are specialized cells that are made in a way that they have specialized channels to secrete things and release things. There are very tiny things, for example, sodium, potassium, calcium, kind of things that may even be able to move. But even these tiny molecules, potassium can move freely in and out because it is too small. Even sodium, such a small molecule, cannot actually move in and out of a cell without having specialized channels. Sodium, this tiny little molecule. I think you know the sodium's atomic structure, and it is a positively charged ion, correct? Now think about spike protein. Compared to sodium, which is one atom, spike protein has thousands of amino acids. Every amino acid is made of multiple carbons and hydrogens and nitrogens and many things. Many things, and thousands of such amino acids. So imagine the number of atoms present in it. Can a cell just make a spike protein and say, you know what, this spike protein is just going to get out of the cell? No. If that was the case, then we would just not need to make lipid nanoparticles to bring messenger RNAs in and make spike proteins. We'll just inject spike proteins. You know, the Novavax has spike proteins. Even those spike proteins cannot enter the cells directly. They will have to be picked up actively by macrophages and dendritic cell to pick them up and work with them. They will have to phagocytose them. And once again, if I go back here and says phagocytosis, it is a function, phagocytosis. And this is not a conspiracy science that just started. It has been a function for decades. So can you see here? Once again, these are the processes of phagocytosis. You can also see pinocytosis, which is drinking by the cell. Phagocytosis is eating by the cell. Bigger chunks are eaten up. Pinocytosis are smaller chunks that are picked up. The reason our cells have a membrane which is made up of double layer of phospholipids. What that means is that outside and on the inside are phosphates. Phosphates can connect with the charged particles. Then inside, in the like the burger, the sandwich, inside the sandwiched part are lipids. Lipids are not charged. So if phosphates attach with something positive or negative, the lipids would not let it go to the other side. And if there is something lipidy that wants to move, then the lipid may be okay, but the phosphates are not going to be okay. So our cells have such a strong barrier that they cannot allow things to come in and out. So now, once again, if you said, Jonathan, that New York Times says this, they have to explain why did they make that diagram. But if there is a spike protein inside a cell, until the cell breaks, until the cell actually breaks down and then allows these spike proteins to get out of it, there is no way spike protein would just simply leak out. That's not going to happen. And it's just because the cell's structure is such that it cannot allow it. And God forbid, if from some cell spike protein can leak out, then their own mitochondria would leak out, then their own ribosomes would leak out, then their own other machinery would leak out, the cell would die. This is actually a process that we do to kill cells. The natural killer cells or the cytotoxic T cells, remember, I always make a cytotoxic T cell with grenade in one hand and with a granzyme in the other hand, that stick. How does it kill the cell? First, it throws, not granzyme, perforins. Perforin and granzyme. These are the two proteins, granzymes. What does a cytotoxic T cell do, or natural killer cell do to kill a cell, to spill its things? First of all, they make a hole in the membrane. That hole is made with perforin. Perforin is the name, perforation. Perforin is a protein. They throw perforin on the cell, which causes a hole in the cell. Then they throw granzyme in the cell, which would cause the cell to do apoptosis or suicide. But creating perforations can also cause leaking of the cell material outside, and that leaking would kill the cell. This is the common way that we kill the cells, our own cells, or bacteria, or other fungi, and so on. We punch holes in them and make the things leak out. So if some cell is leaking spike protein, then believe me, it has such a big hole that it is leaking its other products as well, and it's going to die. So either it is already dying and leaking. So if New York Times says they are coming out of the cell, then they have to explain why. My only explanation could be the cell is dying, but presented on MSc is the correct process. So that's a good question, Jonathan. Arun says, we talked about all countries, but not China, how China manages itself to get rid of this spend. Arun, I have no idea. I am surprised as well. So let's talk about China. So maybe we should actually do an investigation into how China is managing. So China. Total cases 90,000. Billions of people there. Total deaths 4,600. No more cases ever. No more cases. Nothing. Number of active cases 295 currently infected. In other countries where 295 were infected, they have lots of cases on daily basis. Still, they at least said that. And number of deaths, daily deaths, nothing. That I mean, I'm not sad about it. It is good if this is the case. If it is good that this is happening, they should tell us how they're doing it. They should tell the rest of the world which is stuck how they're doing it. And if they're hiding the data, then that is not good. So Arun, I think we have to do a investigative journalism, and I've seen the other 60 Minutes, for example. They've not been able to be very successful there. Okay, so with this, let's stop for today. Please like, subscribe, and share. Minimum like. And then secondly, if you would like to support this work, there are 3 links in the description. If you don't like PayPal, then you can buy me coffees or become a patron. There are links in there. And if you're okay with PayPal, you can support me through PayPal as well. So with this, I will see you this evening. Bye-bye for now.